The crusading era was one of the most important periods in medieval history, affecting many aspects of European culture. During this period, many prominent personalities stood out and recorded their names in history. Among them, King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, also called Baldwin the Leper for the illness that afflicted his body throughout most of his short life, certainly deserves recognition for his efforts in defending the Holy Land. So join us as we discuss the tragic story of King Baldwin IV. Baldwin was born in 1161 in Jerusalem. Years old. Baldwin was brought up by the historian William of Tyre. His tutor was the one who discovered that the young boy was suffering from leprosy. Unlike other children, Baldwin did not cry when he was pinched by his classmates. After a while, it became clear to William that Baldwin felt no pain in his right arm. The king commissioned Muslim physicians to treat Baldwin, but nothing was enough to quell the illness. Leprosy was suspected, but there were no visible symptoms yet, and the doctors were reluctant to diagnose because of the terrifying stigma. The boy would suffer if the diagnosis was made. He was a child. Baldwin would have been required by law to enter the Order of St. Lazarus, a military order made up of knights who were lepers or victims of other diseases. Initially, Baldwin continued to use his limbs and had no noticeable facial disfigurement, but his illness was kept a secret. When Baldwin was 13 years old, his father died unexpectedly of dysentery upon his return from a campaign against Saladin, the Sultan of Damascus. Baldwin was appointed king by the Supreme Court of Jerusalem. However, as Baldwin was only 13 years old at the time of his father's death, the kingdom was entrusted to a regent named Raymond of Tripoli. In the summer of 1176, Baldwin turned 15 and came of age, taking the government for himself. But his health was deteriorating, forcing him to spend more time in bed. Despite his illness, Baldwin's spirit was not broken. He wanted to leave a legacy. He knew his illness would shorten his life and decided to take action before it was too late. As his illness dictated much of his reign, he always had to worry about the issue of succession. Baldwin had planned to marry his sister Sibylla to Hugh III of Burgundy, but ended up marrying her to a French noble knight named Guy of Lusignan. The union was crucial to win military aid for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Once he took over the government, Baldwin commenced planning a full-scale attack on Egypt. The king took advantage of Saladin's campaign in Aleppo to spearhead an attack around Damascus. It was his first war experience. Despite having already lost almost all movement of his limbs and the use of only one hand, he declined to delegate his military duties and entered the fighting in November 1177. Sultan Saladin left Egypt to attack the city of Ashkelon. Baldwin, then 16 years old, commanded the Frankish army and rode towards Ashkelon to save the city. The Frankish army was considerably outnumbered compared to the Muslim army. Saladin kept on his march toward Jerusalem, figuring that Baldwin would not dare to follow him with so few men. Saladin enabled his army to spread out over a large area, plundering and ravaging villages. Meanwhile, Baldwin and the Knights Templar managed to break through the Muslim blockades. Baldwin chased Saladin until nightfall and then retreated to Ashkelon, experiencing the loss of nearly 90% of his army. Including his own personal guard of Mamluks, Saladin fled back to Egypt, assaulted by desert Bedouins on the way. Barely a tenth of his army made it back to Egypt with him. The aftermath for Baldwin, however, was also disastrous. He was in puberty when he launched his daring campaign against Saladin. It was probably partly because of this campaign, which required camping in the countryside and spending days without the usual foot and hand baths, that made Baldwin's leprosy deteriorate. The disease unavoidably ran its course through the horrific stages of increasing disability and facial disfigurement. Baldwin was gradually paralyzed and had to be carried on a litter hung between two knights' horses. His blindness came soon after. Intellectually sharp but mindful of his physical shortcomings, he proposed to abdicate the throne, however, in honor of his leadership. This was overruled by the noblemen. By 1183, Baldwin was feverish and, thinking he was on his deathbed, named his brother-in-law Guy of Lusignan as his successor. However, Guy's reign was marked by continuous warfare with Muslim rulers, as he tried to stop the Muslim advance. In 1186, Christian lords met at a council in the fortress city of Jebel Aj, modern-day Castellet, to settle their differences and decide how to deal with the threat posed by the Muslims. The meeting did not go as planned, and the lords argued over who should hold the highest positions in the kingdom. Guy of Lusignan, Baldwin's brother-in-law and regent of Jerusalem, was proclaimed King Guy's cousin. The 5-year-old Baldwin V was made the nominal king, while Guy was to act as his regent until he came of age. Yet Baldwin V was treated as a figurehead with little real power. Upon hearing of the meeting, the powerful noblewoman, Isabella of Ibelin, seized the castle of Jebel Adish and prevented the nobles from leaving. She demanded that they acknowledge Baldwin V as the true king. Eventually, the nobles agreed and left the fortress. But this was just a setback. On May 7, 1187, Saladin decisively defeated the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin. This victory allowed him to capture the entire kingdom of Jerusalem except for Tyre and Acre. Guy of Lusignan was captured and sent to a dungeon in Damascus. Meanwhile, Baldwin V escaped to the coastal fortress of Jaffa, when the Muslim leaders gathered in Jerusalem to administer the conquered territories. Baldwin was proclaimed King of Jerusalem and Acre. Saladin attempted to capture these two fortresses, but his sieges were unsuccessful. In the meantime, Baldwin V lived in Jaffa in luxury, playing dice, hunting and hawking, while his people suffered from starvation and disease. In early 1189, European reinforcements arrived. The Third Crusade was launched by Kings Richard the Lionheart of England, Philippe II of France, and Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. Their goal was to recapture Jerusalem from the Muslims. Frederick drowned on his way to the Holy Land, and Richard and Philippe achieved limited success. However, in 1192, Richard and Saladin agreed to a truce. The Muslims retained control over Jerusalem, but Christians were granted access to the city for pilgrimage. The truce also stipulated that Christian prisoners would be released in exchange for Muslim captives taken during the Crusade. Baldwin V was among those released. Back in Jerusalem, the barons wished to restore Guy of Lusignan to power, but Baldwin refused. The citizens of Jerusalem sided with Baldwin and forced the barons to accept him as king. He was now in his mid-20s, and leprosy had totally incapacitated him. He was completely blind, paralyzed, and unable to speak. He could only communicate by writing. Baldwin V ruled as a puppet king, while the actual power lay in the hands of his mother, Queen Sybil. A few months later, Baldwin fell ill with what appeared to be a mild fever. But as he was already in poor health, he was unable to fight the infection. He died on March 16, 1185 at last, finding peace after spending a lifetime in agony from his illness. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre near his father, King Amalric. Notwithstanding his illness, Baldwin managed to defy all odds and ruled Jerusalem for almost 11 years, keeping the loyalty of his subjects to the very end. He prevented the immensely superior forces of Saladin from dominating his kingdom on 5 occasions. He will forever be remembered for his bravery and tenacity in the face of adversity. Despite his numerous accomplishments, his name has been overshadowed by the stigma associated with leprosy. All things considered, King Baldwin IV was indeed an extraordinary medieval monarch whose life and times continue to fascinate historians today. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.